Hello and welcome back to the Boro Breakdown podcast, an opposition preview show with Tom and our guest for the evening, Ben from the YouTube channel Ben HD, who is here to give a Preston perspective on Saturday's game. Ben, thanks very much for joining me.
Top stuff. Pleasure to be on.
Good stuff. So just to kick things off, how would you sum up Preston's season so far?
It's been a bit of a weird one with us so far because I think that if you were to just look at the league table, you'd probably think that we are whereabouts we probably thought we would be. But I think the underlying performances to that, there's quite a bit of frustration around the club at the moment, really. I think given how many sort of goalless draws and drab affairs that we've sort of been subject to so far this season, I think the frustration has sort of come on from that, really. And I think something that's probably played into that as well, and something that you guys will look to take advantage of, is at home so far this season. We've really not been at the race. I think we've got the second worst home record in the league so far this season. We've only hit the back of the net twice at Deepdale so far. So that lack of goals that's been apparent with our season, I think, has built up quite a bit of frustration in the fan base. And I think coming off the back of that Derby Day defeat we had over the weekend against Blackpool, there is, I'd say, frustration amongst the fan base at the moment. It's probably the best way to sort of sum it up with how we're going.
So on the pitch then, what would you say is kind of leading to that lack of goals? Because I think early on in the season, Preston became really well known for not scoring many, but not conceding many either. So
Yeah.
how has it been to watch? Is it just not creating enough, or have you been a bit unlucky just to not score many?
Yeah, I think it's changed a little bit from the start of the season. I'd certainly say for the first 5 or 6 matches of the season, we were getting into those situations where we were really unlucky. I could point to maybe 4 of those goalless draws right at the start of the season, where on another day we probably would have ended up winning those matches. But I think there's a couple things at play in terms of why this has been the case. I think number one would probably be the recruitment in the summer. We definitely didn't nail that. Ultimately, we've got a manager like Ryan Lowe who's sticking to his principles in terms of playing the 3-5-2, and we didn't really back him in the summer to go ahead and get the players to play the brand of football that he wants to. We're still persisting with Brad Potts as a right wing back, and he'll do a steady job there, but that's not his natural position. And so to try and build up the play without a natural right wing back has been a little bit tough so far. A lack of goals, I think, has also come from us not properly backing up Emil Rees in the forwards department as well. He's our only player so far this season that's scored over 1 goal. I think that as of late, when we've not perhaps been creating as many chances, I think there's a case for us becoming maybe a little bit predictable. I'd pin down Ben Whiteman as our best player and as our key performer. And I think that opposition managers have figured out that if you manage to mark him out of a match, we really struggle to progress the ball up the pitch. We don't necessarily have the best ball playing centre halves in terms of out and out defenders. They've been very good so far this season, but when they're given time and space on the ball and Whiteman can't quite drop in to get us moving up the pitch, I think we've really struggled to sort of get the ball moving through the lines. And there's been a few things in there that sort of all coincided into one, I think, in terms of why we have had this lack of goals, which has been quite frustrating.
Yeah, so you just mentioned it there about not properly backing Ryan Lowe, who's sticking to his principles. You obviously got 2 wins last season against Boro. He looked really impressive in the last game of the season. How would you have said the Ryan Lowe era was progressing so far, even kind of in spite of the transfer not backing him in the transfer window?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think that everyone completely sort of bought into Ryan Lowe when he came in. He's a very sort of charismatic manager, can get the fans on side, made that connection with the fan base, and I think that was something that we were sort of crying out for after we had Frankie McAvoy, and to an extent probably Alex Neil as well. Tactically Alex Neil was very good, but didn't really make that effort to get sort of on side with the fans, whereas Ryan Lowe has. And I think that the early signs under Lowe were very promising. And I'd even suggest that the early signs even this season were quite promising. But I think that Lowe's got to a point now where you can see in the post-match interviews as well, he's got quite a frustrated figure, I think, because of the sort of resources that he's had available to him so far. So started out very well, but I'd certainly say there have been cracks appearing recently, which a few people have picked up on. But the Championship's bonkers this year. It's the sort of league where if we string together a few wins before this break for the World Cup, we'll be right amongst the top 6. And at that point, we can't really have any complaints. So a little bit mixed, a few more cracks seeping in, but I still think the vast majority of people are sort of on board with Lowe, and the frustrations are just hopefully, we get that recruitment right in January.
Just going back to recruitment a second, then, because I was wondering about that. Is it down to some sort of recruitment strategy in the summer? Because I remember towards the end of the summer when we were linked with Emil Rees, and it obviously never went any further than that, although there were rumours that a bid might have been made. The kind of feeling from the Preston side I got when I was doing my research was that you guys did actually need the money to bring in the players that Law wanted, and then Reese might have been a transfer that was necessary. What do you think that was the case, or was it the case that Preston are trying to work their strategy regarding transfers a very specific way?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think we are in that sort of boat of championship clubs where we want to be that sort of sustainable, self-run club where, we'll get the money coming in for players and then we'll go ahead and reinvest that money into the squad. And I think that when we first came up to the championship, we were very good in doing that. Thinking of the fees we picked up for like Jordan Hugill, Greg Cunningham when we initially sold him, Callum Robinson. I think the problems that we've run into is in going ahead and replacing those players. If I was to go through this squad now and pick out the sort of saleable assets who I could pin down and say, okay, we'll get a few million for him, that could be reinvested into the squad. I think they've sort of been dwindled down really, and I can only think of maybe 2-3 off the top of my head now. Reese is obviously one of them, Ben Whiteman, and then you can make an argument for one or two others, but given their contract situations, so. We're not a club that's been amazingly flush with money, given our ownership status as well. With obviously Trevor Hemmings recently passing on, that then the club has been given to his son and his family. And there is this sort of underlying feeling that they are looking for a potential sale. And so as that's the case, there has been the feeling of them perhaps being quite reluctant to put any more funds into the transfer market. And so we're at a little bit of a stage where we're in limbo, it does feel like, with our ownership at the moment, and whether or not any sort of more money will be made available for Ryan Lowe to go ahead and spend in January. So it's a bit of a tricky one with that at the moment with money for us.
You just mentioned Emil Rees there as one of your kind of more saleable assets. Obviously, I mentioned earlier he was linked with Boro in the summer, never progressed into anything more. But how would you rate how he's been so far this season? Because I think you mentioned he's the only player to have scored over one goal for the team. And, personally, if you've only hit the net twice at home this season, he's the only one who's not, he's the only one who's scored over one. That's where my money's going on Saturday against us. So, but no, how has he been so far this season?
Yeah, it'd be typical championship for him to have an absolute worldie in this sort of game, wouldn't it? But it's been a weird one with Reece because I think last season he got over 20 in all competitions. But with Ryan Lowe, there was the feeling that he wasn't completely sold on fitting into this style of play. I think the second half of last season, it was Cameron Archer mostly. A lot of Reese's goals last season came in the first half of the season under Frankie McAvoy. The first month or so of the season, when there was that interest from you guys, the sort of story we were getting from the club and from Lowe was that he's been a little bit unsettled. So he wasn't actually on the pitch that much at the start of the season, really. He was on the bench and sort of having cameos. But Reece is that sort of striker who comes into form and scores in spurts. So he'll have a run of 5 games where he'll get you 6 goals and then he'll go the next, 6 or 7 without scoring. He is that very much sort of confidence type of striker. But I think we've got him at the moment in a zone where he has been looking decent. His link up with Alvaro Fernandez on the left-hand side has been fairly good. Even thinking back to the weekend, he won the penalty that Ben Whiteman went ahead and tucked away. So he's definitely our biggest goal threat from that point of view. And while he probably doesn't have the overall goal return that he'd have probably liked to up until this point, he's, still by far and away our biggest threat going forward.
So looking ahead to Saturday's game then, you mentioned Preston set up in a 3-5-2. Who is it we should be looking out for in that team, and kind of how do you look to play when you've got the ball?
Yeah, so we are very much a possession-orientated team that will look to sort of build the ball up from the back. And to be honest, we probably play 2 slightly different variations. It will either be a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-2-1. And I'd probably edge to it being a 3-4-2-1 against you guys, just because Troy Parrott's out injured at the moment, and we don't really have that second man to go up front with Emile Reece. So we've tended to play with those sort of 2-10s off him, really. So that would be how I imagine we'd go ahead and approach this game. Most of our creativity tends to come down our left-hand side, whether that will either be Robbie Brady, who's obviously got a wonder of a left foot on him, can put a ball in like that, or Alvaro Fernandez, who's a little bit more of a direct threat. We've got him on loan from Manchester United. Probably the only player in our squad who's got that ability to go past a man in sort of 1v1, 1v1 duels and things like that, and then look to cut the ball back for Emile Reece, really. But I think so far this season, we're averaging a goal from open play every 255 minutes, which, so it's been a real drag. And I think it's even worse than that at home so far this season. So a corner or a set piece we'll certainly look to threaten from. But I can't say what I'd do just to see some goals from open play, if I'm honest. That's what we're all looking for.
So set pieces have been one of our weak points this season. We had Huddersfield at Riverside last week, and they were just trying to score directly from corners at one point. It was mad to watch. But where do you think the game's going to be won and lost from a Preston perspective then? And are there any Boro players you'd be looking out for as kind of danger men who could pose a threat on Saturday?
Yeah, I think whenever I look at your team, I usually look at the wing backs really, and Giles and Jones. I certainly think that up against our boys on those sides, that'll be a really interesting battle. Obviously, depending on how Carrick goes ahead and sets up, he might do something completely left field in this one. But I think from our perspective, the midfield will be a big one. I think one of my probably gripes with how we've set up so far this season is when we do play the system with the 2-10s off Emile Reece. I think we've sort of caught ourselves out at times in becoming a little bit too overly defensive, and that midfield will sort of end up being a little bit of a box, and sort of Emile Reece will be a little bit isolated from that in the end. So I want to see those two number 10s, if we are going to play like that, getting pushed up as high up the pitch as possible and trying to put you guys under as much pressure. That's what we want to see at home, and it's just not quite been the case for us lately. It's not quite been falling for us in the final third. So I'm looking forward to seeing your wing backs for this one, but I think that midfield battle will be big, and whether or not Ben Whiteman can go ahead and really pull the strings for us in midfield, or you manage to go ahead and mark him out the game.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one on Saturday, because up until the last couple of games, it was a 3/5 at the back, and then we've ended up with Jones playing further forward, Tommy Smith at right back, and Ryan Giles at left back. Surprisingly, he wasn't played further up. So be interesting to see if we do actually stick with the wing backs under Carrick. But just final question, looking ahead to Saturday, predictions for the game. What are you thinking?
Yeah, my heart says that we've got to bounce back from that Blackpool game, and realistically, it probably wasn't. The scoreline reflected quite harshly on us from that game, really. But I just think that with our home record so far this season, that lack of goals from open play, and the fact that you've got a new manager for this one as well. I recorded my predictions before this one, and I've actually got it down as a 1-0 for you guys. I think you may just take it. Whether or not we can spring a bit of magic against you guys like we did last season, I hope so. But at home, it's been a bit of a frustrating one. It does feel like if you guys get on top early, there will be a few groans coming from the crowd, which I think will be something that you can probably play on.
It's a strange one, that, because I had 1-0 to you guys as my prediction. I've it's my third away day of the season, and the last two have been to we've lost 1-0. Coventry was the last one Gyökeres scored, who was linked to us, so I'm fully expecting Reece to be the one who scores on Saturday.
I'll take it.
But that was it. Thanks for joining me, Ben, and to the listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. This was your Preston preview in a pod.